Welcome to the Code with Jason meetup. Me and my friends Sanjeet and Abhay here. We're just having a casual chat, which will continue for a bit. Maybe we'll get into some code and stuff too. Um, but Abhay, you had brought up, or I brought up Rails World. That's coming up next week as we record this. Um, and I'm actually not presenting at that, Abhay,
Mm-hmm.
which is a relief.
Oh,
It keeps occurring to me. I'm like, oh shit, like next week is or Rails World is coming up. I got to get my talk prepared. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not giving a talk. And it's a relief every time I remember because usually I go to
mhm.
conferences and I do give a talk. I
Right,
submitted
right,
one, but it didn't get accepted, as happens with a lot of conferences.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good though. That's good though. You can just sit back and relax and see what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, for once, so since I think you've attended a lot of Ruby conferences, right? I've like tried to see a couple of your talks on your YouTube. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I've gone to a lot of them. Do you go to many conferences?
I generally don't. But I am interested. I am looking for good ones around my area since right now I'm basically not traveling much, but yeah, if there is anything in Virginia area or DC area, I'm very interested.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah, I don't hear about a lot of stuff in that area. Seems like you might
right.
have to travel up to New York or yeah,
That's
somewhere
that's
like
that's
that.
the thing, right? Every time I just saw anything. In fact, I was looking forward if there is any version of KubeCon like Kubernetes conference
Hmm.
happening this side, but no, I think it's on the West Coast. So yeah.
Yeah, there's not a lot that happens in Michigan. And usually when there is, it's something, well, at least in West Michigan, it's like Microsoft focused. That's kind of
Hmm.
the technological culture around here is Microsoft. And I suppose some amount of Java and stuff, but I think mostly Microsoft .NET. There's
Right.
virtually no Ruby stuff happening here.
Hmm.
Although
Where's
RailsConf
this one happening? Like, where's the one that's happening next week?
Toronto.
Toronto. Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's great because Toronto's a pretty big tech town. I know a lot of
Right.
people in Toronto. The
Right. Right.
challenge of Rails World is going to be like there's so many people I want to catch up with, but it's only 2 days.
Right.
So yeah.
That's great. Yep, that's great. So when is this? Next week on.
Yeah, September 26th and 27th, I believe.
Mhm. Right.
Hmm. Yeah, but
That's great.
a few minutes ago we were talking about books. I want to bring up another book that I just started reading. I have it right here actually. It's Peopleware. I'd heard about this book for many years. Have you guys heard about this book by chance?
No,
Yeah, I heard
no,
about
not
it
really.
some time ago, but yeah, not lately.
Yeah,
Tell
it's
us.
just one of those books you always hear about, but I never read it. And it was written in like the 80s or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. And it's really good because I'm starting to, so in my consulting, um, it started off more technical. People know me for Ruby on Rails testing, as you guys know. And most of my early consulting was people asking me for help with testing and sometimes object-oriented programming and just general programming and stuff like that. And I would work with really small organizations where there was maybe only, like it was maybe a bootstrapped business with only one technical person in it. And so the discussions we had were very technical, but now I'm working with larger organizations that have maybe like 30 or 50 engineers and trying to help them improve certain practices, maybe with testing, maybe with OOP and code design and stuff like that. And I'm realizing that all the problems, all the technical problems have their root in people problems. There's this famous quote from Gerald Weinberg, which is whatever the problem is, it's always a people problem, which is totally true. Because the code didn't write itself, obviously. And it's
Yeah.
like, how did things get this way? Why are things the way they are? Um, I've had clients where it's like, uh, there's somebody on the team who clearly should just get canned, and like everybody knows it, but for whatever reason, that's not possible.
Mm.
Like it's just the kind of organization where there's like I don't want to say unions, but like some kind of some kind of reason why that just is not possible to do that. Some
There are
kind of
some all,
administrative reason or something like
yeah,
that.
yeah. All sorts of reasons happen, isn't it? People have been around for a long time, etc.,
Yeah,
etc.
yeah.
Yeah, all sorts of things. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I found that very interesting. So I've been reading some management books and stuff like that. And that's what this book is all about. It's about the people side of software development.
Yeah. And also, I suppose, I think what makes software development so different is that, you know, if if it is manufacturing or something like that, there are other levers you can pull. For example, there is
Hmm.
the supply chain or, things like that. But in software engineering, it is people, people, and people, so
Hmm.
that's it, yeah, nothing else.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm trying to figure out how to navigate those waters because if people are hiring me to help them improve their condition somehow, like let me I have to do this dance of like trying to give examples that are concrete enough without like giving away
Yeah,
who I'm talking
yeah,
about.
of course, of course.
Yeah. But luckily there's commonalities. Um, so it's like, oh, let me think. Oh yeah, here's something that's hard. A lot of organizations have a problem where they kind of feel leaderless. Maybe you guys have experienced this where you're on a team, but there's no strong technical leader saying like, "Hey, we should do things such and such way," and stuff like that.
Mm, mm. Yeah, so on that, something
Hmm.
that I had in a project that concluded something like end of last year. We had this problem, decision by committee. It never
Mm-hmm.
works, because
Never
there will
works.
be 10 different opinions, but there has to be some design authority who has the final word, and
Exactly.
yeah, see, sometimes a bad decision is essentially no decision. you know if you make a decision, move on, then you can perhaps fix it later. But if
Hmm.
you sort of prevaricate and there is no decision being made, that is time wasted, because you don't even know, you haven't got a prototype, you have nothing to try out, you are stuck in that decision phase still, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that decision by committee, like, oh man, that's the bane, that can be the bane of organizations, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I think another word people use for that sometimes is consensus, because like everybody's familiar with that decision by committee
Yes.
idea and everybody knows it's bad, but then
Yeah.
like consensus has this positive connotation to it,
Oh
but
yes,
it's really
yes.
the same thing.
Same thing, same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and consensus doesn't work because like the you can have like a discussion about some technical topic in Slack. And my experience is these things always just kind of fizzle out because nobody has the authority to say, like, okay, we've heard all the viewpoints. This is the decision. It's just kind of people talk and then nothing happens.
Yeah, because Slack is Slack, and it is flat, isn't it? Because nobody turns up, nobody is projected as an authority there. So yeah, you're spot on. Because some of these decisions has to be made in conversations, as to people talking on, conference calls or face-to-face meetings, that type of thing. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there has to be a benevolent dictator. Uh,
yeah.
you know, obviously the history of the world is that we went from having monarchies and dictatorships mostly to now at least in the West we have democracies, and everybody rightly recognizes that democracy is a better form of government than monarchy or dictatorship, but they take the idea a little bit too far and think that private organizations should be democracies also. but it doesn't make sense. Just because democracies are a good way to run a nation doesn't mean it's a good way to run an organization. Um, I think an organization should be a totalitarian dictatorship,
Mm.
however, a benevolent one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, like for example, my family, my household is a communist dictatorship. Um, Me and my wife are, we're the co-dictators.
Yeah.
We don't let the family vote on things.
Of course. Yeah.
Um, and it's communist. We're all sharing the resources from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs. It's totally communist. And that's perfect for a family unit, disastrous for a nation. And obviously, if we had a democratic free market economy in our family household, that would be disastrous too. So like the system of governance has to be matched to what the organization is. And again, an engineering organization should be a dictatorship where a leader hears all the input and says, "Okay, I've heard everyone. I value your uh, I value your opinions and views and stuff like that. Now, I personally am going to make the decision, and we can revisit it or discuss it or whatever. But like, that's the decision. You're not making the decision. I'm making the decision unilaterally. I think that's the right way for it to be.
Mm. And again, even in democracies, it's a bit like, we as citizens, we cast the vote. But in a way, we are delegating that authority to make the decision on behalf of us, say to the prime minister or the president. So
Hmm.
it's not like, every time the prime minister or the president has to make a decision, they are running a referendum, are they? No, they are not. So they take the decision on behalf of us. Whether it is an easy one, difficult one, whatever. So yeah.
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 In the sorry, in the work context, democracy just does not work. As you said, whether it is called consensus or decision by committee. Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Yeah, and so the problem I've mostly encountered so far in my career is that, at least from my perspective, there's nobody who's willing to be what I call the chef in the kitchen.
Mm.
Because that's maybe more fitting. I'm a little bit tongue in cheek, of course, when I say
Hmm. Yes.
absolute dictator.
Mm.
Um, but it's understood that a chef in the kitchen is the one giving the orders. He's the one in charge. Um, and in my experience, there hasn't been somebody willing to be that person. I'm not sure if I'm always right about that. Um,
Yeah.
but I have a client now who he has that position in the organization. Like he has that authority organizationally, but possessing the authority and actually getting people to do what you want are two very different things. And so I'm working with him now to figure out, okay, you have the willingness to be the chef in the kitchen. How do you actually get people to do what you want? That's not so easy.
Right.
Yeah. Now, I wanted to put another tilt on that, which is you are going in as a consultant into organizations, right?
Hmm.
So sometimes in large organizations, what happens is this. There's a tough decision to be made. Nobody inside want to make that decision.
Hmm.
And then they bring in somebody external to do that.
Mm.
And that external consultant's assignment is for a period of time, right?
Hmm.
And then, and that assignment finishes. And once that is over, the consultant, is gone. And if that
Hmm.
goes wrong, the internal management can blame the consultant for that.
Ah, I see.
I have seen that happen, especially when it comes to reorganizations and things like that. That's more,
Interesting.
human resources type of thing, not that much in the IT context. But
Hmm.
what organizations blame their vendors for all sorts of problems. Like for example,
Interesting.
outsourcing. If you have problems with your processes and you outsource it, you are outsourcing a problem.
Hmm.
Yeah, because if you don't sort out your processes but outsource the function, that problem is not going to go away.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is that sort of thing. Like sometimes, people try to, sort of put the problems out there instead of solving them themselves, because sometimes it is difficult, and or sometimes it's
Yeah.
impossible, as you said, And another thing that you hinted at was, somebody senior is not able to make the change. Why? Sometimes even the junior most people can scupper the best initiatives from the top people.
Mm.
Especially if people who have been around for a long period of time, know the systems inside out, So yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had a thought when you mentioned about like outsourcing the
Yeah.
solution to the problem or outsourcing the problem or whatever. Um, a lot of times it's not so easy to even identify what the problem is.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, it's like we know that we're in pain, but what is the cause or what are the causes of the pain?
Mm,
And that's something that it's hard for me to articulate to people what I do as a consultant because I'm trying to be actually very general, but I can't tell people that I just help people with things in general. I have to be specific. Um, but what I like to think I do is I help people think clearly because a lot of
mm,
a lot of times people have a problem and they not only do they not articulate what the problem is, but I think they're not even realizing that they should articulate what the problem is and they're not doing it.
mm. That, that's what they call naming it, or identifying what the problem is. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. And people know that something is wrong, but not quite what. That's what
Hmm.
you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, like flaky test is a good example of this. I've seen flaky test problems in a lot of organizations. And it's just like every once in a while somebody blows up and they're like, "Damn it, guys, we got to fix this. It's the top priority now. Fix all the flaky tests."
Mhm.
But like, what exactly does that mean?
Mhm.
Because it's actually really complicated. There's the individual flaky tests, and each one of those tests has its own root cause. But then this is where it gets a bit nuanced, but the broader flaky test problem itself has a root cause. So it's like there's two layers to it. There's each, I use an analogy for it. Um, like there's water in the boat, and that's a problem. And there's also a hole in the boat, and that's a problem. And so we can address the symptom by bailing water out of the boat, and we can address the root cause by plugging the holes in the boat. But most organizations who have this problem with flaky tests, they haven't even, they don't realize that they're in a boat with water and a hole and stuff like that. All they see is we have flaky tests and it's annoying and we need to fix it. But the problem is too complicated just to say fix it and expect it to go away. Um, so Abhay, this is ostensibly a mentorship session for you. So I don't want to
No, it's really interesting because
yeah.
that's another because I think what we see as new grads is the only programming side of things, right?
Hmm.
I graduated like 6, 7 months ago. But all I think about is how do I code something. However, I think software engineering as a field is much broader than that, right? You've got to understand, as you said, sometimes all you can see is symptoms, but there are root causes that are much more influential if you address them. So yeah, it's interesting. It's very interesting for me. And yeah, also I'm yet to, I mean, I did do voluntary work uh so basically I worked at a consulting firm. I'm working as a part-time software engineer right now. So we worked on building an e-commerce solution using Spring Boot Java and SQL. So a lot of the times, right, I was working with one other person who was an architect, and he was working under a client. He was actually working under the client, but however, like they really did not, even he really did not understand what they want, and most of the times we were just going back and forth, uh, and nobody was taking a final call, as you said, right?
Hmm.
What we want to build. I came up with. They asked me to build something over the weekend. Just give them a mock-up of like a React website. I spun up something. I made something in Figma. Showed it to them. They said they liked it in the beginning, but then they went back and I coded the whole thing in React like over like a week. Then they were like, no, this is not what we want. We want to do something else. And then the senior guy comes up and says, hey, sorry, I couldn't make the decision in in the first place, so we just went forward with it. All that messed up, and then then I had to redo the whole thing, go to the back end, build the entire API, deploy it, then show it, all of that. So so it's very interesting how this problem just is not limited to just 1 or 2 person teams, but like entire organizations itself. It's very interesting.
Yeah, yeah, that's
You have to build
definitely.
a mindset
Mhm.
around it to circumvent it some way.
Um, and I'm curious for you as a relatively early developer, um, what were you thinking as you were experiencing that? Was the experience surprising to you or not surprising? What were your thoughts?
So I expected a few back and forths beforehand. However, I thought they were going to be a little more structured with it. Uh, there was no structure.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, so a lot of the times I had to like do things overnight, or I just don't know what to do for like weeks together, right? So
Yeah.
it was like I had to be like that all the time. So that part was really challenging. But yeah, it is quite surprising uh, s- how like these how the software field is so like it has a legacy, right? It's been
Mhm.
around for like 50 years now, 50, 60 years, more than that. And still we have not figured out how to manage the teams and the expectations of the teams, and the hierarchy uh, of the team and all that. It's interesting. It's interesting to see. But yeah,
Yeah.
there's definitely good things about it also.
Yeah. Well, there's a lesson I learned way too late in life. It's a pair of truths. Um, Everything is shit and everybody sucks.
Right.
And it sounds cynical, but it's just actually the cold hard truth. Um, and like I've had so many jobs at this point and so many consulting gigs. I've seen so many different organizations and they're all dysfunctional, like all of them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm,
Yeah.
true, true.
Yeah. And like every single code base I've ever seen is just a disaster, like every
Mm-hmm.
single one of them.
Hmm. So I work for a largish organization, and one of the phrases that I hear people say, not that frequently, but still I hear people say,
Hmm.
I am really surprised how anything works in this place. You
Yeah.
But so picking back to something Abhay was saying, so Abhay, like I would have been in your position, say something like 25, 26 years ago, and looking back, like perhaps if I could tell that younger self of myself, something, it is this: expect very little from organizations. Of
Hmm.
course,
Right.
they will pay you your salary and things like that, but beyond that, expect very little.
Right. Right.
Because
That's something I'll keep in mind. Yeah.
yeah, because there is some freedom in knowing that, because otherwise your mind could go, in all sorts of tunnels, thinking about things. But yeah, because you would think in larger organizations the senior people are so powerful and things like that. No.
Right.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's a thing like going to war. People say the senior generals most of the time didn't have much of a clue. The only person who really knew what was happening was that junior most person at the war front, fighting 1-to-1 with the other side. They were the only ones who knew, who had much of a clue what was going on. Everything else is guessing game.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's so yeah. Just bear that in mind.
Yeah. Just remembered something. The first time so the first version of the API that we wrote over there, I wrote that and like uh pushed it to the GitHub, and then told I asked them to ask the senior person to go through it and recruit it and let me know if there are changes. Weeks together, I don't get anything, and then like I continued working on it, and then they wanted something else with the API as well. I just remembered that it was very funny. I had to redo the whole thing. So
Yeah, it's
it's
crazy.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I think the economy is like 99% waste. Um, and I honestly don't think it's unique to software development. Like, Abhay, you had said it's been around for 50 some years or whatever, and we still haven't figured it out. Like, think about the healthcare system.
Mm.
Um, and each country has its own quirks and stuff, and the American healthcare system is notoriously crazy, but I'm sure other countries have their crazinesses also. Um, but it's like, how long has the field of medicine been around? Thousands of years.
Thousands of years, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
and we still don't have it figured out. And so just like, again, everything is shit. Just like everything is shit. And the thing you said about that thing that sometimes people say where you work, Sanjeet, I'm surprised how anything works around here. I've said before that the great miracle of the world is, or the great wonder of the world is not why so many things are so bad, but that anything works at all.
Right.
Like, I can't believe we have like you can take an airplane from point A to point B and it actually doesn't crash. Like, that's incredible. Like,
Yes.
meeting the people who run the world on a day-to-day basis, like after having those experiences, and then you can also like successfully fly in a plane or like get a surgery and not die or something. Like, I can't believe that anything works.
Mm.
So at this age, I've like set my expectations for just everything to be really low.
Yeah. Because that is
Yeah.
the only way to avoid disappointment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, what, the funny thing is that it goes back to the Buddhist philosophy, because,
Mm.
Buddha says that desire is the root cause of all misery. But,
Yeah.
in some ways, our desire for surety or our desire for, things to work the correct way 100% of the time, that itself, causes us misery, So
Hmm.
sometimes you have to let go of things. Yeah.
Yeah, I talked to so many new grads. Abhay, you might find this funny. Um, I talked to new grads in their first job, and they're like, "Man, I got dealt a bad hand. Like, this place I work, they first of all they gave me no training. The code has no documentation, and nobody's even really telling me what to do. They just like point me at the code base and say, 'Have at it.' This place is unbelievable." And it's like, no, it's not that this place is especially bad. It's just that's the world.
Mm,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's how it works.
Hmm.
Interesting. That's really interesting. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
sometimes, and going back to what we are saying, in terms of things not working, that is true in the macro scale. But if you come down to the micro scale, so if a piece of program works as it is expected to, if it is working as it is expected to, it is because somebody has put the effort in.
Hmm.
In other words, nothing works fine by accident, because it's
Right. Got it.
yeah.
Yeah.
You see where I'm coming from, right? Because somebody
Yeah,
had to
yeah,
put their mind to it, design something properly. And now, of course, from that microsystem, once you start, going further out, the interactions with the outer world, that might not work fine, or interaction with another system might not work. But one system in itself contains self, if people put their mind to it, they can make it work, So yeah. And
yeah.
again, for me, some of the satisfactory examples I have from my career is when I found allies, in other functional areas, like in the sense that, people who wanted systems to work a certain way for business outcomes, they became our allies and they were our stakeholders. And then they have the conversations with our seniors. So then it becomes a priority for the organization. And then, time or budget is allocated and things get better, So
Hmm.
I remember, like this is a very basic example. Like there was this batch processing that used to take something like 48 hours, you know. This is those times when IBM eggs was the flavor, like, Red Hat was a baby in somebody's womb, like, that type of time. Um, and storage, memory, everything was costly. So, we couldn't throw, hardware at the problem. So we had to come up with software, solutions. And yeah, luckily, as I said, like, the stakeholders became interested in the solution. Then they came to our seniors saying that, okay, they asked for it. And then, we make changes to the software, make it run faster. So, something that used to take 48 hours takes 6 hours, so it is, yeah, because there is so little one person can do by themselves, so it is that
Mhm.
building those connections, and taking people to that journey, isn't it? It's almost like that storytelling thing, that building up that story and that there is that outcome to it, so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a really interesting comment, Sanjeet, that nobody can fix something by themselves. I
Mm.
mean, obviously it depends on the scenario and stuff like that, but
Oh,
like,
yeah.
um, a lot of times I find people want me to fix something,
Mm.
um, but it's not the kind of thing that one person can fix.
Yep.
Like, for example, fix our flaky tests. It's like, well, I can fix some of the symptoms, but the
Hmm.
root cause is because, for
It's just
example,
gonna come again. Like it's just gonna happen
Yeah.
again.
yeah,
Right.
the root
Yeah.
cause is that in general, the team isn't familiar with how to write high quality tests. It's
Yep.
Right.
not even that they don't know how to write tests that aren't flaky. Like it goes much, much deeper than that, just like super fundamental stuff. And it's going to take like a year or more to get the team to the point where this isn't going to be a problem anymore. The idea that I personally could fix that or any one person could is just not how it would work.
Yeah.
Right.
And I
Right.
think, Abhay, as you were saying, what is the guarantee that the same problem will not recur
Right.
once, Jason has moved on, isn't it? He has moved.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and something I read in this other book I read recently, The Secrets of Consulting by Gerald Weinberg, um, it said something like most of the time, despite people's best efforts to make something happen, nothing happens.
Mm.
And that's,
Right.
a lot of these things like, I think a big reason why a lot of people, frankly, aren't that successful in life is because people interpret these statements of cold, hard reality as negativity or pessimism. I'm not
Right.
trying to be negative or pessimistic. I just want to be correctly calibrated to reality
Yeah.
because if your mental model of reality is inaccurate, then you're not going to be able to successfully interface with reality. So I'm just trying to develop as accurate of a mental model of reality as I can. And it goes back to that thing you said, Sanjeet, about having miscalibrated expectations. Like if you expect, if I
Mm.
were to go into every client engagement and
Yep.
expect that I'm going to be able to improve their situation, then I'm going to be disappointed,
Yes.
8 times out of 10 or something like that.
Mm.
So even though it's sad, it's sad that most of the time I'm not going to be able to help.
Mm.
Better to acknowledge that sad reality than to expect things to go great and then be disappointed time and time again.
I don't know, it's about being realistic or pragmatic about it, isn't it?
Hmm.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think even I think only when you're realistic and you see the reality, then you at least have a shot at solving something, right? Because
Mm.
Hmm.
you can't fix a headache with just a band-aid, right? You have to diagnose the problem actually. You have a problem, you got to solve it. You have to know the ins and outs of that actually what's happening. You can't just if there's a band-aid packet lying around, you just don't put band-aid and expect it to go away, right? So yeah, only
Right.
when you know what the problem is, you have a shot at solving it. I think, yeah.
Yeah, and I think most problems are not solvable. Because most problems have their root in the people, and if the people aren't going to go away, then the problem's never going to go away. So
Yeah.
like I've worked at organizations where they have certain problems, and I get to know the people at the top, and I'm like, oh, well, there's the problem. The problem is these people, and these people aren't going to go away. So the problem's not going to get solved. Like 2 + 2 = 4. Like there's just no way around it. And the only way to not wallow in the muck is to go and leave and find a different organization. And I
Yeah.
personally had a really rough time for about 10 years. I was just miserable for about 10 years because I went from job to job, and it was just all shit. But I thought the problem was me, um, largely because the I found that I was different and that I didn't fit in at a lot of these organizations. I was deeply unhappy with, frankly, how stupidly all these organizations were working. And something I didn't realize yet is that, like, there's this like bell curve of intelligence, and by definition, most people are not exceptionally smart. Most people are average.
Mm. Yeah.
And even in programming, where people are supposedly smart, there's a lot of people who are really not that smart, and even a lot of people in leadership positions who aren't that smart. For example, I had a job where this was in like 2007. I had a job where we didn't use version control. We didn't have a separate production and development environment, and I brought that up with my boss. I didn't. I used tactful diplomatic language, but I was like, "Hey, this is crazy. How about we use version control and have a dev and prod environment instead of just doing all our work directly on the prod environment?" And he's like, "Yeah, those seem like good ideas, but now's not the time." And I'm like, "All right, like, there's never going to be a time when now's the time for people who think like that." And so I left that job and I got a different job. Believe it or not, they were the exact same. No version control. They did maintenance work directly on production. Insanity. Like that's
That is
just,
scary. That is very
oh,
scary.
yeah. And it's just so dumb. And again, the reason for that was because the guy in charge of all the engineering, he was just not smart. But I thought I could make a case and campaign for smarter practices, but it was all met with none of it was welcome. And I
Mm.
was seen as kind of a problem and an annoyance. And they were right. Like I was just being annoying. And the other people who worked there, the people who worked there for, 5+ years or whatever, um, they just did their jobs. But like I personally can't tolerate working in such a stupid way. Those people could. And that's what I found out the entire world is like. Like most people can tolerate working in this stupid, painful way, maybe because they themselves aren't that smart either. Because again, most people are not exceptionally smart. Um, or maybe it's just because they have a certain fatalistic view about the world where it's like, well, this is life. You clock in at the beginning of the day, you suffer, and then you clock out and you go home and watch TV or whatever. But for me, it's like, fuck that. Like, I don't want to accept that kind of a fate. So I always got rejected by these organizations, but it took me like 10 years to realize that, like, oh, wait, like, in a sense, it totally is me, but also in a sense, it's them, not me. Like, I couldn't believe that all these people could possibly be that stupid, but that really is the case. Most people aren't very smart. And again, like almost every organization, like 95% of organizations, are just shit. And so I
Mm.
hop from place to place, expecting to eventually find somewhere good. And every great once in a while I would. But I was suffering from miscalibrated expectations.
Yeah.
Right.
Because, it's in typical work situations, what I have found is that, like, there will be 10% of stuff that you would absolutely hate. And then there is the 10% that gives you absolute joy, in the sense that, you are able to make a difference and you have done some productive work. And then the rest 80% is, keeping the lights on, so to speak, as in you
Mm.
maintain and you manage. It's not earth-shattering improvements, but you tinker here and there, and of course, they add up over a period of time. But that could be the case with even your engagements, isn't it? Like, so 10% of those will be absolutely fantastic, out of the world type of ones, but 80% of those may be, within double quotes, BAU, business as usual ones. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. I've kind of carved out a good good work situation for myself that's more
Yeah.
fitting to my personality than what I was trying to do before. But even
Mhm.
so, again, most of my client engagements aren't going to be a smashing success. Maybe even it's the case that nothing will happen just because that's the way of the world. And that's, is that good or bad? It's maybe not even the right way to think about it. It just is the way it is.
Yeah, that's the way it is.
Yeah. I was wondering, Jason, have you read anything on engineering? As in, have you read any specific software engineering books that help you think the way you think about organizing code or systems in general? Have you read
Yeah.
anything like that?
Yeah, the top book I recommend to people is Code Complete by Steve McConnell.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Let me just note that down.
Yeah.
It's right.
Yeah, I really admire Steve McConnell's thinking. Um, and then Martin Fowler. I enjoy pretty much everything I've ever read by Martin Fowler.
Right. Interesting. I just noted them down so that I can
Yeah, especially
go back to
Martin
them.
Fowler's book Refactoring.
Right. Got it.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'll look into those because
Yeah.
because it's been a while since I wanted to see if there are any good books about just engineering and thinking in systems, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, I'll definitely check that out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to recommend books because I have in my head this idea of like one single book that would like give you everything
Encompass everything, but
that you would
yeah,
want. But
yeah,
such a
No,
book doesn't
doesn't
exist
exist.
exist.
Yeah.
Right.
yet, at least. I personally have in my head a list of books that I want to write. I'm working on my Rails testing book right now. And the next one on my list is a book that's more about code design, architecture, this stuff that you're talking about right now.
Right.
Um, but that's that's way down the road.
Mm,
Um,
right.
and so
A book.
the best that I've been able to do is I've had to grab from these disparate sources and then synthesize the picture in my mind.
Yeah, it's generally like that. It's just I think it's really difficult to fit everything in just one way of thinking, right? There are like 10 ways of thinking, and you have to pick and choose what's good for when, right? So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but I do think like there's this quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson, or maybe it's Thoreau. Anyway, the quote is for every 1,000 hacking at the leaves, there's one striking at the root. And I
Right.
think the idea from that is like most people are focused on trivial things most of the time. And then there's very few people focused on the essential things. And I think there is a way to distill software engineering into the few things that are the very most important. Um, but if there's a book that does that, I haven't seen it yet, but I can share some of those things that I think are most important. Um, I think probably the most important thing is automated testing.
Automated
Um,
testing.
The one book I think that I come
mhm.
across, I think it has sort of stood the test of time is Mythical Man Month.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but, if one message I took away from that is this, it goes a bit more rather than the doing of software engineering, it's more like the management of software engineering. Is this that you cannot throw more people onto a project and get it delivered any earlier. It doesn't work like that, So, yeah, that's one of the key principles in there.
Yeah, I would very much agree with that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I bought that book just recently actually, and I read part of it and then I forgot where I put the book. Um, um, but okay, so that's what I'd say is number one is automated testing because without tests, you can't refactor. And your initial swings at your design, you're always going to turn out to be unhappy with it later because maybe you gave something the wrong name or you just like conceived of something in a wrong way or reality changes. And so now you need to update the code to match the new reality. And without automated tests, you can't change your mind. Um, and then the second thing, the second most important thing to me, I think would be abstraction. And I'm sure that you've come across the concept of abstraction, Abe. Um,
Yeah.
but to you, what does that mean, abstraction?
So when I think about abstraction, I think uh it's just I forget the name of this device that you use to that is used in garages, right? When you want to lift the car up, you use a device that you just use your hand. However, the entire car is being lifted by just
Mm.
this motion, right?
Oh yeah,
Uh,
Jack.
yeah, Jack. Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. Uh, so for me, abstraction is something like that, right? It helps you manage really, really hard stuff, but it looks really easy when you manage it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's how I think about it. Like the tools that make and and tools that make just the process of dealing with large code bases really easy.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, that's how I think about abstraction.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that that's the benefit of abstraction. And I think that's a really good way to put it. And I like that Jack analogy too, because you can lift like a 3,000 pound vehicle with just one hand.
Right.
Um, to me, that's the benefit of abstraction, but there's also like what is abstraction? And Sanjit, I'm curious if you have any views on what abstraction is.
For me, it's on similar lines of what Abhay said, as in hiding the complexity. If so it's a bit like, you expose your methods or APIs, but there is a whole lot happening behind the scenes, which the user of the system or another system interacting with this doesn't have to worry about.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's
Yeah. Yeah, I think that hits the nail on the head. And sorry, maybe you even said it, Abe, but like hiding complexity and maybe to be more precise about it, even like hiding the incidental complexity and putting at the forefront what's essential.
Right.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, putting at the forefront the essence. Yeah, I think that's a very good description, Yes.
Yeah, and I haven't figured out a great analogy for abstraction yet. I always try to find those analogies because I feel like those are great ways to communicate things. I was talking with this guy. I met this guy the other day who was really smart, and he happened to be a philosophy major. That's who I was kind of referring to earlier. Um, and we were talking about modeling and like what is a model. And I think that's closely related to the idea of abstraction. Um, and he brought up the idea of a subway map. And I thought that was like the perfect example.
Right. I
Mm,
was just thinking about that, right? When you said,
Mm,
what is modeling? I was just trying to put it in words. I was like, some sort of mapping, right? Some sort of
mhm,
mapping which is easier for your human mind to contemplate, which
mhm.
just reduces down. It's just scaling down of complexities. I think, yeah,
yeah, so let's talk about that a second. Like we have the actual physical subway system, and then
right.
we have the subway map. Um, Abe, why do you think it is that I think that a subway map is a good example of a model?
Uh, because it's really, really hard to memorize every single, uh, you know, track the subway takes, right? Every single turn, every single, uh, stop it stops by, and the, uh, the regularity of the regularity of the subway. So it's really easy if you boil it down to something like a map that just says, hey, every 15 minutes, uh, or just marks all the stops. Uh, you don't have to memorize all the tracks. It's just right in front of you. So your memory is replaced by vision, which is much easier to, uh, which is a much easier input. Uh, I think that's how generally abstraction should be. It just scales everything down to your basic senses to understand.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, and I think a model allows the user of the model to do a job. What's the job that the subway map allows the user of it to do? Maybe there's more than one.
To navigate. It's really useful to navigate. Uh, you just know what subway to pick when you want to travel somewhere.
Yeah, and maybe it would even be useful to like go through a specific use case. Like, let's imagine that you actually need to take the subway to go from point A to point B, but you're like not
Yeah,
that familiar with the subway system. Like, maybe let's walk through like step by step how that would go and the subway maps role in that.
yeah. So, huh.
So first it's like you're all right, so you're in Paris and you're in
Okay.
some part of Paris, whatever
Right.
part you're staying in, and you want to get to the Eiffel Tower. And
Right.
so like the first thing you're doing is you're like right now you're walking down the stairs into the subway. What do you do
Okay.
next?
So the first thing I need to do is to figure out, um, which is the right subway to take, because there could be multiple ones
Mm-hmm.
heading to and coming from Eiffel Tower, right? So I would have to choose first which subway to take. So obviously my choice will depend on how where it's headed. Uh, so I'll have to look for signs that say uh that indicate which subway to take.
Mm-hmm.
So that should be my first move there.
Okay. Okay, and then you find the right one, you go into it, and then what next?
Then I have to be sure that it's heading that way, right? So I'll have to find a map there, or I'll have to find a screen that shows all the platforms that
Mm.
come next before Eiffel Tower. Make sure it's the same thing that I previously saw on Google Maps, so that I don't get confused.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, next step would be verification, mostly verification if this thing that I'm doing, this direction that I'm heading towards is the right direction that I need to go in,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think that would be my second step.
Okay. Yeah, and how do you use the specifically like what part of this map system or whatever, like how would you go about verifying?
Uh, right. So verification will need someone who's already familiar with the layout. So I'll just have to blindly trust here.
Yeah, yeah, like I
Either I have
think
to trust Google Maps or someone else.
yeah. Yeah, like there would be probably like a certain stop. Like you
Yeah,
ask somebody and they're like, "Oh, you take such and such stop." And then you would look at the map and that's where the map comes into the picture and you would be like, "Okay, there's that stop. Here's the stop that I'm at now and here's the stop that I'm going to."
right,
Yeah.
right.
Okay, and let me ask this. What again, we have the physical subway system. Okay, gotta go, Sanjeet. Thanks for coming. See you later.
See ya. See ya.
Thank you, Sanjit. Thank you. We'll talk.
Um, yeah, so there's the physical subway system, then there's the map. What does the map omit? Like what is present in physical reality that's not present in the map? I'm not looking for one specific thing, just like there's no right
Right.
or wrong answer, just anything.
I think it just only provides the very bare essential uh, information required for you to know where you exactly are right now.
Yeah. It's like the map omits like 99.9% of reality.
Yeah. Just the bare minimum information for you to know where you are. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's like a mistake that a lot of developers make is like when they're modeling something, they think the model is supposed to be like a
Real
reflection.
thing. Okay. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's like it's like they're making a machine that like simulates reality, but you're not
Reality.
trying to
Got it.
simulate reality, you're just trying to create a
Model it.
model that makes the job you need to do easy to do.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mhm.
That's a wonderful way to think about it. Because uh how far can we go trying to rebuild reality, right? Because it's the probability of events is really uncertain there. And that's why probably we have so many problems here in software as well. We're trying to just replicate the whole thing, and when we run into problems, that's why probably we run into problems so often because things change so fast. But maybe when we think about this as a model of reality or as a map that just bare it just does the bare minimum it needs to do, I think that would serve a much better purpose, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so like, I said I think the most important thing in programming is testing, and the second most important thing is abstraction. I might actually revise my opinion a little bit. It's like abstraction, modeling, um, and all that stuff. Like I also call it wielding the analytical knife, like looking at reality and deciding how to slice it up into conceptual pieces. Like somebody did that with a subway map. They're like, okay, we have the concept of a stop, and so we'll include that concept in our model. Um,
Right.
and we have the concept of, I guess they call it a subway line.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's an interesting one because that is like that's a total conceptual construct. Like
Right.
there's a track, like physically there's a track,
Yeah.
but physically there's not a line. A line is just an idea that's like overlaid on top of the physical reality.
Yeah. Yeah. We're just trying to we're just trying to uh lower the dimensions of reality as much as possible for us to understand, I think, when we are modeling.
Mm-hmm.
Just make it really, really simple. Like you said, right? When we're talking about tracks, we are seeing actual tracks. However, it's just much easier for our brains to understand. Hey, this is a line. How does a line look? A little bit like a track. So I think it's just much easier for us to understand like that when you think in concepts instead of hard truth, right? So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and a point I want to make there is like, and actually Steve McConnell talks about this in Code Complete. There's like two reasons for creating a class. One reason is because all right. And so by the way, what is a class? A class is a concept. Um, when
Mm,
you're creating a class, you're basically saying I'm making a concept. And so like in a subway map, they have a concept of a stop, which is a real physical thing.
right.
But then they have this construct called a line, which is not a real physical thing. It's an imaginary thing
Yeah.
overlaid on top of reality. And so those are the two reasons for creating a class. Like one is because you took it directly from reality, and another is because you like invented it. And that's another mistake that I see developers making it is like almost all the classes that are created come directly from reality, and very few of the classes are useful inventions. So,
Mm,
like the way that somebody came up with the concept of a line because they thought that was a useful imaginary idea, that was very clever and useful. But
right.
in programs, you see classes with names like, I don't know, customer processor or something like that. It's like,
Mm.
okay, that's a class, but it's not really a concept. It's not a model. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I understand. So how do you determine what is the good balance between uh class that models reality and class that models a concept? So how do you determine when to use what,
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't
right?
think yeah.
Because I think we use concepts uh when things are really multidimensional, as I said, right? Uh, let's take the Earth. We do not understand how to contemplate Earth because we live on it, and it's really, really big and really, really, uh, it differs from place to place. When you travel,
Hmm.
your environment changes and everything changes. So how do you really contemplate that? How do you really think about it? So the only way to think about it is to think about it as a globe, as just a globe on a table, right? The
Hmm.
only way to really think about it is like that. I mean, without going to space, actually,
Hmm. Yeah.
right? Uh, so I think that is when we try to scale down things. That is when we try to conceptualize things when it's really out of our I mean, it's not out of our imagination. However, it's really distant for our imagination to catch.
Okay.
I think that's what we do normally. I don't know how it would translate into programming though. It would be interesting to think about.
Sorry, I got distracted. I was admitting a new joiner we have here. Welcome, John. John is muted. Oh, now John is gone. All right. Well,
Right.
he came an hour and 15 minutes late anyway. Um, yeah, so sorry. With your globe comparison, I missed the point you were trying to make. Sorry.
It's just that we are so tiny compared to the globe
Mm-hmm.
uh that we miss the dimension of roundness, right? We just miss it.
Mm-hmm.
The only way to comprehend the dimension of roundness is to scale it down so that we can see it,
Oh yeah.
right? I think that is when we invent concepts. That is when we uh, invent analogies. Or it's just that it's too multidimensional, or the dimensions are too huge for you to contemplate, and that's when you scale it down a little bit to think, uh, so that it is easier for the imagination to think about.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one because like how would you model the world? It's like, well, that's not an answerable question because what do you want to do with it?
Right.
Like you talked about a globe on a table. That's an interesting one because like what is a globe for? Um, what the heck is a globe for? Like a lot of times it's just decoration. Um, but I guess you can do that thing where you just spin the globe and put your finger down and it's like, I'm gonna move to
Yeah.
Botswana. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
yeah.
could serve a different purposes depending, I think, because you could I mean, it's very useful to teach children, right? So
Hmm.
it's to show them mountains and how different are mountains from. Again, you cannot map really water there, uh so yeah, I think it's really limited. Uh
Yeah, it's
I
like if
think
you
it's
want to
really
gain a
limited.
general familiarity with the geography of the planet.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and
Uh
it's great for that. It's obviously it's a terrible road atlas. Like
yes,
if you want to drive from Virginia to Michigan, like a globe is not a very good model for that.
yeah,
You could
right.
maybe kind of use it for that. You need to like go north, but it's not gonna be great for it. And in that case, you'd use a road atlas, which has no representation of the roundness of the Earth, and it only models, maybe like one state at a time, one
Mm.
U.S. state, and so
I
it's
think
it's very limited in that way.
Yeah, I think what we do is uh as as per our needs, right? Uh See, I think when we could think about it like this. When we want to get a very general understanding, we look at uh a bigger picture, right? We look at a map or a globe.
Hmm.
Uh since our understanding is not towards something, right? It's just we want to get a very broad picture of the problem.
Hmm.
Uh, but as we zoom in, uh, if I want to go from here to, as you said, if I want to drive from Virginia to Michigan, I need I need a version of globe that is much closer to reality,
Hmm.
right? When you
Well,
talk
I don't
about
know.
software,
I don't
when
know
you
if
talk about
that's
software,
true.
it's like as in closer to reality. I don't mean like we need like pictures and all that. However, I mean it's just uh much it's far from reality. However, it's much closer to reality than the globe.
Do you mean it's like more fine-grained?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it's much closer to reality when you compare to globe, right? As in, it's, I mean, not really though. Wait,
I mean, it's more
that's,
zoomed in.
it's more zoomed in. Yeah.
Yeah.
You lose the roundness, right? You lose the roundness. It's more closer to the reality that you conceive. Like you see the world as a flat place. It's flat on paper, right? So you lose the roundness there, and you lose all the unnecessary continents and all that. I
Although to
think
be fair,
that's
I almost never see the world from this aerial view that the map gives us.
okay. Right, right, yeah. So I mean, I think your maps become more fine grained as you become specific towards a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this map thing, now that we talk more about it, it's like a pretty good, it's a pretty useful discussion for modeling because like there's so many different kinds of maps for different purposes.
Right,
And the idea again isn't to what's the word? Uh simulate. The idea isn't to simulate reality, it's to surface the useful parts of reality
right,
that we need in order to do a certain job.
right, right. I think, yeah, I think it's not a wise attempt to just simulate reality since it's really so multi-dimensional, right? It's just, and you cannot think in so many dimensions at one time. You'll always
Yeah.
miss something.
And here's another mistake that I see a ton. This might be hard to make an analogy for, but like, um, let's say we have a situation somehow where we need to do like globe stuff and we need to do like atlas stuff too.
Right.
Most programs would probably put those same things in one model. Maybe
Okay.
here's a better example, like a subway map and a road map. Like there's New York City, and we have the subway map for New York City, and we have the road map for New York City. A lot of programs would just put those in the same map, which
Oh,
just
okay.
makes everything harder
Right.
because then you have stuff, those maps overlap, because like there's sometimes with subways you care about the streets.
Right.
Um, and so like there'd be stuff in that model that like belongs to both. There'd be some stuff that belongs to only one, and it wouldn't necessarily be clear which is which, and they're like both
Yeah.
cluttering each other. And honestly, like most, at least most Rails apps that I see, it's like there's 15 different maps and they're all merged into one.
Right. Right. Yeah, that would make it really difficult when you're implementing that class, right? It's just way too difficult to understand what method or what uh property caters to what map.
Hmm.
So I think that would be really messy. I think, as you said, it would be much easier if you had a model for each map.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, I apologize, but I do have to go.
Right.
Um, Yeah, thanks for scheduling this second session. Like I said, most people come for one or two and then they disappear forever. So I'm glad you came back. I hope you come back many more times. Um,
I enjoy these
mhm.
sessions a lot, honestly, because a lot of things that I think of, I'm think from from these conversations, I'm understanding that I think you think of these things too. So it's really interesting for me to join and talk about these things. I'm really grateful.
Good, good. So I assume you still have my scheduling link so you can schedule
Yeah,
another
yeah,
session. Yeah,
sure, yeah,
great.
yeah,
Yeah, so I hope you grab another one and I'll talk to you next time.
sure. Thank you so much, Jason.
All
I'll
right.
see you next time.
Thank you. See
Thank
you
you.
later.
Take care. Bye.